So in my last video, I talked about how I think those big and overly complicated editing timelines and node trees are something that's kind of goofy and probably unnecessary for most creators out there. And sure enough, I got a few comments from people saying that unfortunately for them, that type of complicated workflow is just something that's expected, which is totally fine. But I also got a comment that I found especially interesting from a person saying that they agree with most of my points in that video, but they also felt like with some of the stuff I was saying, I was promoting mediocrity. And I responded by saying that it was never my goal to promote mediocrity. My goal was just to promote the idea that people shouldn't overcomplicate their creative process just so they can maybe impress some random person on the internet with how convoluted they've managed to make their workflow. My goal was to encourage people to not doubt their simple workflow if it is something that gives them results they're happy with. But that little interaction got me thinking, when did we as creators start confusing simplicity for mediocrity? When did we start supporting the misconception that just because you're not doing something the hardest possible way, you're not working hard and you can't still produce great work? Because as far as I'm concerned, you can absolutely have the most complicated gear setup, the most complicated workflow that looks really impressive on a screenshot, and still make mediocre work. But then I thought about it some more and I realized that as I was just getting into the whole world of creating stuff for a long time, I also thought that the harder something felt, the more it must mean that I was doing it right.
What do you mean by that?
So maybe this is just a phase that every creator goes through. I feel like we've kind of built this myth around hard work in the creative space. Like if something feels too easy, it can't be good enough. If it didn't take you forever to make, it probably didn't take real effort. But in my mind, that is not what hard work is about. To me, working hard means caring about the details that matter and being intentional with what you put your effort into. And doing things the hardest way possible is usually just ego or insecurity trying to prove something to yourself or to other people. And I say that as someone who has done that a lot. But from talking to a lot of creators over the years, I've realized that a lot of those people whose work looks and feels effortless, it's not because they're doing everything the hardest way possible or doing more. It's often because they're actually doing less. They have simplified their workflow to what actually matters, and they've gotten really good at repeating that simple process. And this is something that I've actively been trying to do for my own work, both personal and professional, for a while now. And I can tell you that in my personal experience, it has allowed me to make what I think are better videos that feel much more the way I want them to, that seem to resonate much more with people, with a whole lot less effort involved. For me, every video I work on, regardless of who it's for, takes a different amount of time and effort to put it together the way I want it to be. But whatever I'm working on, as I've started being more conscious of this idea of trying to simplify the process, I've started realizing how many things I often try to do in a way that is unnecessarily complicated on autopilot that doesn't actually impact the final product in any meaningful way. So one way I've been trying to make things simple for myself is with the gear I use. I've gotten a lot of different pieces of gear over the years, but for a while, I've just accepted that 99% of the time, all I need to make some stuff that I'm happy with is my FX30 with a lens on it, an ND filter, and maybe a microphone on top. Obviously, some lighting also helps, but I think you get the point. Back in the day, I would try to figure out ways to use as much of the gear I owned as possible on every single project because I was like, well, I own this thing, so I'm going to do my very best to try and get the most out of it. But somewhere along the way, I realized that it was much more of an ego thing and just trying to seem more professional. But in reality, as I've spent more time making stuff, I've accepted that I need very little to get a good end result. Now, on the other hand, there's definitely projects I work on where rigging out my camera with a bunch of accessories and using some more niche pieces of gear is useful because it offers convenience and it makes certain types of shots, get ready for it, here's the magic word, simpler. But again, it all comes down to having the self-awareness and intentionally trying to find the path of least resistance to doing a good job without a ton of unnecessary effort. Some people might say that that makes me lazy. They might say that I'm promoting mediocrity, but I would argue that I'm just trying to be intentional with my gear choices. But it's not just gear and simplifying the shooting process. I've also actively been trying to make my edits as simple as possible for a really long time now. So if you go through a lot of my YouTube videos, you'll notice that the edits for them are nothing crazy spectacular. My goal is to share some stuff that I've learned with people who might find it helpful, or just to share a message that I personally find important and think is good to be out there. So considering what my intention is with the content that I'm making, I've realized that a complicated editing workflow doesn't really get me any closer to what I'm trying to do. So that's why I choose to make it simple. I'm not gonna load every single video I make with flashy half-a-second B-roll clips, because I like to think that the people who watch this channel don't have the attention span of a goldfish that needs to constantly be stimulated. Obviously, if I'm making something like a showcase or a review of a product or a service or whatever, I'll include some B-roll clips of showing how the thing works as examples to support what I'm talking about, but I try to keep it simple and not go overboard with it. I've also spent some time figuring out a simple color grade that I've turned into a power grade, so I don't have to color grade every single one of these YouTube videos from scratch. And then that lets me focus on grading the clips that I do think need a little bit more attention. And something else that's really helped me make my editing workflow a lot simpler is the sponsor of this video, which is Motion VFX. Oh no, it's a sponsored segment. Yes, it is, but if you stick around for it, you might save some money. They're currently running their biggest sale of the year with a site-wide discount of 30% and up to 50% on some of their flash sales. So if you've been thinking of picking up something from their website, right now might be the best time to do it while saving yourself a lot of money. I've been using plugins from Motion VFX for ages, and most of you have probably already heard me talking about how much I like them before. Client work, personal work, doesn't matter. For me, a big part of making my creative workflow simple is also getting rid of the parts of it that I don't enjoy doing, like making motion graphics from scratch. And that's exactly why I really appreciate having assets like titles or elements or overlays from the different collections they offer on their platform. And yes, this is a sponsored segment, but whether you believe me or not, regardless if it's a sponsored video or if it's just someone randomly asking me in conversation, I always recommend stuff from Motion VFX as a really simple but really high quality way to make your life as an editor a lot easier. So I definitely recommend checking out what they have to offer at the link below. It's a great way to support the channel, it's a great way to make your life as an editor easier, and right now is your best chance to do all of that while saving yourself a lot of money. But yeah, getting back to what I was saying, as I've spent more time in this whole creator game, I've realized that I don't agree with people who think that hard work means just mindlessly grinding away and losing yourself to hours of work. To me, it's being intentional with what I spend my time and my effort on and doing my absolute best to try and create something that is authentic. And with that in mind, I have noticed how much easier it's been for me to stop thinking about how to create and start thinking about what I want to say. The simpler my creative process is, the more I want to create, because it doesn't feel like this huge boring chore that I need to deal with. And I just feel like when you stop trying to make every single one of your projects prove how hard you can work, it leaves so much more mental energy for storytelling and emotion and rhythm and all of that stuff that people actually care about long term. So yeah, if you're worried about making sure the stuff you're creating isn't mediocre, I genuinely don't think that doing absolutely everything the hardest way possible is what's going to help you avoid that. Hard work isn't about making things painful. It is about putting effort where it counts. And I think that a real sign of growth as a creator isn't when you have the most complicated workflow. It is when you find a way to have a ridiculously simple one and still create something great that people are willing to stick around for. But yeah, as usual, I've been yapping for a while, so feel free to leave any thoughts you got down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.